Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
This happened in November. My parents went for a week to visit some second cousin in Tula who supposedly needed help preparing for the wedding. I stayed at home with my 5-year-old sister Masha. We lived in a private house, not far from the city. Day 1. I woke up quite early. My sister was sitting on the floor and sorting out her toys. It was necessary to prepare some food and feed the child. Half an hour later, breakfast was ready and I called Masha into the kitchen. After enjoying the cereal and juice, my sister ran to my parents' room to watch TV, and I started washing the dishes. Soon a friend called me and invited me to go for a walk. Without thinking twice, I agreed. It was impossible to leave Masha at home because she was afraid of some monster, like most children, so I had to take her with me. We walked for a short time and returned home by lunchtime. My sister didn't want to eat. Of course, during the walk she ate enough sweets and cookies. Mom would have beaten me for this, but oh well. My sister and I had separate rooms, but while my parents were away, she settled in mine. Time flew by very quickly and soon it was already very late. I put Masha to bed and started watching the movie. Suddenly some sounds came from the kitchen. Pausing the movie, I headed towards the source of the sound. There was no one in the kitchen and I returned to my room. I no longer wanted to watch the movie and went to bed. Day 2. I woke up around 12. There was no sister in the room. Her absence did not seem strange to me. Most likely Masha is sitting in her parents' room and watching cartoons, which are usually on at this time. And so it turned out. I was allowed not to go to school, but this did not free me from homework. The day passed very quickly. Nothing interesting happened. Day 3. That day my sister woke me up. She screamed and I had to run to her to find out what happened. From my sister's story, I understood that she saw a man in the window who looked at her and then disappeared. What nonsense! We have a good security system, alarm system and all that. It would be impossible for someone else to get into the site. I thought that my sister was imagining things and did not take seriously her request to check the area around the house. Later, Masha calmed down. We ate and decided to take a walk. We returned at 7:30. What were we doing all this time I was on the street? Yes, actually, nothing. My sister just didn't want to return home. After dinner, we sat down to watch a cartoon. This made my sister feel calmer. I couldn't sleep that day. Masha tossed and turned all night, and I imagined some sounds. Day 4. My mother's call woke me up at 10:30. She asked if everything was fine with us, and if we needed to bring something from Tula. I said that everything was fine. We were having a good time and there was no need to bring anything. Of course I reassured my mother, but my anxiety remained. On this day, Masha and I locked ourselves in a room and did not leave it. We brought food in advance. It was already 2 a.m. Suddenly someone started knocking on the room. Knock, knock. My sister was scared and I hugged her and began to calm her down. Nothing will happen. Knock, knock. This time the knocking was louder. Nothing will happen, I repeated in my head. Day 5. I called my friend and asked her to come. An hour later, she was already sitting in my kitchen. After listening to my story, she thought that I was kidding her, but I swore that it was all the truth. After that night, my sister went everywhere with me. Of course, the child was very scared. How happy I was when my friend agreed to stay overnight with me. After dinner, we all went to my room and locked ourselves in again. Soon footsteps began to be heard, so heavy and rough. Everyone was filled with fear. We walked on the first floor, most likely in the kitchen. My sister was curled up on the sofa, and my friend and I were listening to strange sounds. Half an hour later, someone knocked on the door. Knock, knock. We sat in silence. Knock, knock. My sister squealed quietly and came up to me. Tears appeared on her face. Knock, knock. This time the knocker had no intention of leaving. Knock, knock. We couldn't even move. They started scratching at the door. Oh, that terrible sound. Soon the sounds died down. The clock showed 4:07 a.m. All. My parents will arrive tomorrow. This all must end. My friend swore at me and left, saying that she would never return here again. My sister and I walked around the whole house but found only traces that led to the basement. We were smart enough not to go there. That day we decided to go to our grandmother and spent the night with her too. Day 7. Last. We returned from Grandma's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The parents warned that they would be home around 10 in the evening. My sister drew terrible pictures all day. They showed the man she had seen a few days ago at the window. At 8 o'clock in the evening, we sat in the living room and watched TV. Half an hour later, we heard footsteps again. I took Masha in my arms and went up to my room. Suddenly, the light turned off. The door began to open quietly. My sister buried her face in my shoulder. I saw the silhouette of a man. He stood still for half a minute and began to approach us. That's it. This is the end. The front door opened and Mom's voice was heard. The man disappeared. I begged my sister not to tell anyone about what happened. She agreed and we went downstairs. We all sat down at the table. Our parents told us about our aunt's bad character and other nonsense, but I didn't listen. I couldn't get this man out of my head. What if he comes again? This happened in the winter of 2015. 6 months before that, my father died. To say that I was very upset then would be too hypocritical, since during his life he managed to fray the nerves of my mother and me. His addiction to alcohol lasted as long as I can remember. And if others, having abused alcohol, usually try to come home and go to bed as soon as possible, then with my father everything was completely different. Every evening, more precisely, every night everything developed according to approximately the same scenario. Deep after midnight, having had a good ride, he returned home. He took out the keys and tried in vain to get them into the keyhole, but after several unsuccessful attempts, he ended up knocking on the door with his fist so loudly that my mother and I would definitely wake up and let him in. As a rule, my mother immediately ran to open the door so that the loud knocks would not wake up the neighbors. After this, the head of the family, fueled by alcohol and arguments that popped into his drunken head, tried to provoke a scandal. He expressed suspicions of infidelity to my mother, reproached her for not appreciating him. From time to time, the dishes broke. Sometimes even the mother got it. But in the end, everyone went to bed in silence. And in the morning, they pretended as if nothing had happened in order to avoid escalating the conflict. All this lasted until the balls were filled with water. He lost his balance and fell under the tram right at the stop. The funeral passed off relatively unnoticed. No one even sympathized with us. And after that, everyone quickly got used to a quiet, calm life. However, I will remember that night for the rest of my life. At about 1 in the morning, I woke up from the fact that through complete silence, I could hear someone picking the keyhole. I was completely alone in the apartment then, because my mother was on shift that night. The first thought I had was that robbers were trying to break into our apartment. Instead of taking the phone and calling the police, since I had never done this in my life, even when my dad once threatened my mom with a kitchen knife, I decided to go to the peephole and see at least the number of intruders. I quietly crept up and leaned my eye against the crack, but despite the fact that it was light in the entrance, I didn't see anyone there. Perhaps the thief squatted down and picked the lock, but as soon as I thought about it, the grinding noise on the well stopped, as if the one who was there sensed me approaching and hid. But then, a second later, I heard a strong blow on the door, which seemed to throw me back, and I fell on my butt. It was followed by another series of equally strong blows, all of them in the upper third of the door. Again and again, blow after blow. The heat that rushed through my trembling hands seemed to permeate me all with vile hot thorns. I couldn't breathe normally. Nausea mixed with pain in the lower abdomen made me want to die quickly. I have never experienced such wild animal fear. I don't remember how long this loud, persistent rumble lasted because about an eternity after the fall, I passed out. The next morning, my mother found me in the hallway when she returned. She didn't immediately understand what had happened to me, but she was terribly scared when she found her daughter on the rug in only a nightgown. After I told her everything, her only answer was, "It's good that you didn't open it." Hello, everyone. Today, I will ask you to help me. I no longer know who to contact. My parents and brother turned away. There is no one to help. Let me first tell you everything in order. The first time I noticed something unusual in the garden, it was the end of April, and I was preparing for exams at a music school. The routine is as follows. First a choir concert, then a solfeggio test, then 10 pieces on the guitar. I am an excellent student at a music school, so I prepared from morning to evening. Well, I was sitting in the garden and strumming my guitar. The younger brother, thank God, swam in the pool. Now you're probably saying, how did he swim in the pool in April? And I'll answer you, my uncle works on swimming pools and we have a swimming pool in our house. Thank God for that. Otherwise, my brother would have splashed water at me and wouldn't let me get ready properly. So I was playing, and for a second it seemed to me that someone put their hands on my shoulders. I got scared and ran into the house, that is, I pretended to be scared. In fact, I thought my brother was kidding me. I ran to the second floor, sat there near the window and started playing. Then I heard footsteps. I turned around. There was no one. Then I got angry. I ran into his room and there was no one there. Then I ran to the pool and he swam there. I grabbed his hand and started to pull him out of the water and he splashed so hard that I was up to my ears in water. Me. Do you have a conscience, brother? Ha ha ha. Me. I wish I could grow up and get rid of you soon. Brother. You have no idea how much I want to get rid of you. Me. And you decided that if you scare me, I'll run away from here? Brother. What are you talking about? I didn't believe him and just left silently. Then I locked myself in the room and chatted on my laptop with my friends. Olya, my friend, had a pajama party. This was the best way out so that when my brother crawled into the pool at night, he wouldn't fall on me. And I was bored because Mom and Dad left for another country and left us with a nanny. She was kind and let me go anywhere. The party was in full swing and the nanny called me. Nanny, I urgently need to go home, take care of my brother, and then at least fly to Mars. Me, with a sigh. Yes, of course. Nanny, bye. Me, bye. I headed towards the house with my head down. And suddenly again, someone or something put their hands on my shoulders. I no longer paid attention to it and just walked. Well, I calmed my brother down and went to bed. Then, at about 2:27, my brother started yelling and asking to lie with me. No matter how much I hate him, he is my brother, and I love him. Probably everyone who has brothers or sisters will understand me. Well, I took him in with me. He fell asleep, and I became scared. He and I, 2 children, alone in a 2-story house. On the first floor there is a kitchen, living room, and bathroom, and on the second there are 5 bedrooms, and after the stairs there is a kind of hall. This doesn't include the attic. It began to seem to me that I had not closed the front door and left another door open, but I was afraid to go out and check. Footsteps were heard in the corridor. My brother was also afraid and could not sleep. I closed the door to my room, and she invited her brother to play stalker on the laptop. I turned on the sconce and started texting on my phone in ICQ. Well, that's how we survived the night. After 3 days, my parents arrived and I told them everything. They didn't believe me and said that I had read too many horror stories. And my brother, as luck would have it, confirmed this. This continues today. Footsteps, noises, and all that. But my parents don't believe me. Please advise something. This happened in September 1999. I remember that we had an excellent, hot, almost rainless summer, which pleased many people. But now, to the chagrin of those who love to soak up the sun, it has passed, and the lush green nature began to fade. I lived in my grandmother's two-room apartment, who, for health reasons, moved into our apartment, where I vacated my room for her. It's just that Grandma's heart began to play around, and if anything, there's no one to call an ambulance when she's alone, and here my parents are nearby. To be honest, I was not enthusiastic about this housing move, since the area was foreign and the neighbors were unfamiliar. But during the month of August, I got used to it. But there was one advantage. He was his own boss. However, I did not abuse my lordly position. Although I was still 27 years old at that time and single, by my nature I was not one of the rogues. Noisy drinking parties with orgies and whores were not to my liking. I only once invited my best friends to drink beer quietly and peacefully, and I was still bored all by myself. And then, one Sunday evening, I climbed into the bathroom to wash myself. He took some water and lazily lay back. I lay there for about 10 minutes, lost in my thoughts, and suddenly there was a distinct knock on the bathroom door. I jumped up in surprise. I thought my heart would stop from fear. "Yes?" I mumbled in a questioning and trembling voice. The answer is silence. I sat in the water and looked at the door in horror. Thieves? I thought. But the apartment was locked. It is unlikely that they would break into it, even in the evening when there is a tenant in it. It's also not possible to climb from the roof. The third floor is in a 5-story Khrushchev building. And suddenly, there was a knock on the bathroom door again. "Yes? Are you a neighbor?" I asked, trying to speak at least in intonation without fear. But again, silence. I turned off the taps and stood up to my full height. We need to go out and look, I decided. Fortunately, it's not yet the dead of night outside, and I'm not a muslin young lady. Without drying myself, I dressed in home clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt. Then he froze, thoughtful. If they lure me outside, then most likely they are prepared in advance for a specific attack. We must take the risk of being ahead of the curve, and then whatever happens. And I sharply opened the latch and jerked the door open. But there's no one behind her, and there was no one in the whole apartment. The sunset was already fading outside the window. I slept that night with the light on and a kitchen knife under the blanket. The next weekend, when I came to visit my parents, I told them and my grandmother about this incident. Granny confidently answered that it was a brownie and ordered him to pour milk into a saucer, put it in the corner of the room, put a piece of bread next to it and say, "Housewife, brownie, accept a treat from me. Don't scare me anymore. Let's live in friendship." Although it was scary for me to do such a ritual, I performed it, and from then on I really washed calmly. Last summer, my mom, dad, and I decided to go to our dacha in Zaslavl. At that time, I was 16. I took my beloved dog Terry, German Shepherd, with me. In general, around 15:20, we finally arrived and entered the house. Everything was fine. Mom went to cook all sorts of goodies, and Dad climbed into the attic and looked for spare parts for the motorcycle. Everything was fine. I was running around the garden with Terry and doing nonsense. The evening was already approaching. It was about 18 o'clock. We sat down at the table in the kitchen, began to eat and discuss family issues. But suddenly they called my father. He answered the phone. His face took on an alarmed look. When he finished the conversation, we asked what was the matter. He said that our neighbor, Aunt Lena, had died. We lived next door, communicated well. She often treated me and my dog. Our relationship was good, but Strashno.com, here it is. 45 years old and she's already gone. I was upset and went to another room. Suddenly my parents came to me and said that they should go to the city and find out what happened. However, I had to stay. I was terribly scared, but fortunately my faithful friend was with me. Around 7 o'clock, Mom and Dad left the house and told me to keep an eye on everything until they arrived. They promised to be back by 5 a.m., and my mother also added that if something happens, call. This gave me strength, and as soon as they left, I walked Terry, and then, when we arrived, I locked all the doors and all the windows too. It was already dark. To make it not so scary, I turned on the lights in the whole house, took 2 powerful flashlights, and turned on the TV. My friend and I sat down on the strashno.com sofa and started watching TV. Time passed quickly. Terry was already falling asleep on my lap, but suddenly, I heard something fall in the next room. Out of fear, I turned up the volume on the TV. It was about 11 o'clock. I took the phone just in case, and when I turned it on, I noticed that the network was unavailable, although everything was working a couple of hours ago. Okay, I paid special attention to this and continued watching TV. Suddenly, bam! The electricity went out in the entire house. I was scared but not at a loss, took several candles. I prepared them in advance because I knew that something bad could happen, and set them on fire. They gave off a dim light like never before, but that didn't bother me. I took the flashlight in my left hand and hugged the dog. We lay there for about 20 minutes. I was already thinking about how to fall asleep, but then the most terrible moment of the whole story happened. I heard strashno.com someone walking in the attic. I immediately wanted to jump out of my seat and, just in case, take the axe that was standing by the stove. But just as I was about to get up, I saw a certain white silhouette outside the window, walking quite quickly. My dog somehow became wary and sat down next to me, as if he had smelled someone and was ready to rush at him. But I kept it because I was afraid to make noise. I'm lying there, listening, and suddenly I hear someone knocking on the door, but not humanly, but very slowly with an interval of 4 seconds. At first I thought that my parents had come, but why knock? They definitely have keys and they wouldn't knock like this creature. I was terribly scared. I wanted to cover myself with a blanket and hide from all this, but I couldn't. I was afraid to move. And suddenly the knocking stopped, I thought. Everything was over. But the thought of where this creature could be heading scared me very much. What tormented me most was the thought that it would now break the window and go inside. But none of this happened. I was sitting. It seemed like it had already passed. I took a flashlight, turned it on, and almost died of fear. That same white silhouette flashed right in front of me and ran into the hallway at high speed. My dog immediately rushed after him. I was so worried about him that I jumped off, took the axe, and ran into the room after him. It seemed like that was it. There was no one there. Terry also calmed down and sat down next to me. But suddenly I saw that same silhouette in the window. He was slowly moving away from the house, as if he didn't want to leave it. And at that moment the light turned on. I lost that silhouette from sight. It seemed like it wasn't so scary, but suddenly I heard someone's voice. And I remembered that I was watching TV, and now, when strashno.com turned on the light, it started working again. Terry and I went into that room and continued watching TV. There were no thoughts about sleep, and so it was until about 4 a.m. Then someone quickly passed outside the window. I again thought it was that creature, but no, it was my father. I went to open the door, and yes, it was him. He came in, took off his hat, walked into the room. I looked at him. He looked as if he was on the verge of death. I immediately asked what happened there and where Mom was. He said Aunt Jeezy died, her heart gave out, or something like that. But before her death, she managed to write, "In 40 days, come to my grave, otherwise." She could not write further. I felt very sorry for Aunt Jeezy. In the end, Dad said that we had to go to the city. I strashno.com got dressed, took Terry, and we went. When I arrived home, my mother was upset, and so was I. But then I remembered what happened to me at night and decided to tell them. After listening to me, my mother said that, most likely, Aunt Lena did not want to leave me. Aunt Jeezy was buried 2 days later, And then I remembered what my dad told me. Before her death, Aunt Lena wrote, "In 40 days, come to my grave, otherwise." 40 days passed. I decided to go to her grave. I went to our local cemetery, found her grave, sat next to her, and read over the gravestone. "Everything will be fine. Just forget me." I didn't know what those words meant, so I decided to go home. I didn't want to talk about this to anyone. That same day, when I went to bed, I remembered these words, but immediately fell asleep. I dreamed about Aunt Lena Strashno.com, she had long hair, although she always had short hair. But then I hear her say, "I'm sorry," after which she turned and left. But then I woke up because of Terry. He joyfully pounced on me and began to lick my face. After that, I didn't dream about Aunt Lena anymore. It was an ordinary summer night. My wife had gone to visit her parents, and I was after my shift and could not go with her. Having had a good night's sleep, I sat at the computer for the rest of the day. For me, this is the best vacation. After midnight, my eyes began to close. After missing a beat, I decided to go to bed. Having done all the things before going to bed, I went to bed. Started to fall asleep. But then, someone started knocking lightly on the door. I have no idea who it could be. If it was my wife, then she would have called in advance and asked to meet her. We decided that it was just someone drunk who had entered the wrong door, so I decided to ignore the knock. But the knocking only intensified and was persistent. I still decided to get out of the warm bed and look through the peephole. My blood froze in my veins. My heart was pounding and was ready to jump out of my chest. It was not a person. It was huge with long, skinny legs, very pale skin, no nose, and black eyes. I don't know how long I stood looking at it through the peephole, but it seemed to know that I was looking at it and didn't knock. I decided to quietly leave and go back to the room, let him think that no one was home. And he went back to bed, thinking about what it was. Then I started to fall asleep, but in my sleep, I felt eyes on me. I jumped up. Having looked around, I saw nothing, but then my gaze fell on the window. In some strange way, it sat outside and looked at me, and now it started tapping on the window again. It knocked and smiled. I don't know how, but I began to lose consciousness. I only came to my senses in the morning, and somehow he ended up at the front door. Entering the room, I saw an open window and things were scattered everywhere. I didn't tell my wife anything, and no one else knocked on the door. What happened that night remains a mystery to me.